1907, Wall Street nearly collapsed under the weight of its own greed. Banks failed. Panic swept the nation, and in the shadows, one man, J.P. Morgan, stepped in, using his personal fortune to rescue the American financial system. The crisis exposed a chilling truth. The United States had no central authority to stabilize its economy. Out of chaos came creation, but what was born in the quiet corridors of power would go on to shape wars, recessions, and revolutions. This is the story of the Federal Reserve, the most powerful financial institution in the world, yet one few truly understand. The 1907 panic began with the failure of the Knickerbocker Trust Company in New York. A run on banks spread across the nation. With no central bank in place, the U.S. relied on private financiers like Morgan to contain the fallout. It worked, but barely. The episode sparked a nationwide debate. Should private bankers hold this much power? The answer led to an extraordinary secret meeting in 1910 on Jekyll Island, Georgia, one that would shape the financial future of the United States. On a secluded island off the coast of Georgia, a handful of the nation's top bankers and Senator Nelson Aldrich met in total secrecy. They posed as duck hunters to avoid media suspicion. Their goal? To design a central banking system that could stabilize the economy, but still protect the interests of America's elite. What they created would become the foundation of the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. On December 23, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act into law. It established a unique hybrid system, part public, part private, comprising 12 regional reserve banks and a central governing body in Washington, D.C. The Fed's job: manage the money supply, stabilize prices, supervise banks, and act as the lender of last resort. But from the beginning, critics warned that it placed enormous economic power in unelected hands. World War I became the Federal Reserve's first major test. To finance the war effort, it helped the U.S. government sell Liberty bonds and increase the money supply. But the result was inflation and a lesson in the dangers of easy credit. Over time, the Fed's influence grew alongside America's role as a global superpower. By the 1920s, it was trying to engineer prosperity, but it was also laying the groundwork for disaster. When the stock market crashed in 1929, the Federal Reserve failed to act aggressively. Banks failed by the thousands. People lost everything. Economists now argue that if the Fed had stepped in earlier, cutting interest rates and injecting liquidity, the Great Depression might have been avoided or at least softened. This failure transformed the Fed's reputation and fueled massive reforms during the New Deal era. Under Franklin D. Roosevelt, the Federal Reserve's role was redefined. Gold ownership was outlawed, tying the hands of the private citizen and centralizing power further into Washington. The Banking Act of 1935 strengthened the Federal Reserve Board's control over monetary policy. The Fed was no longer just a stabilizer. It was now an active architect of the national economy. After World War II, the U.S. led the creation of a new global financial system at the Bretton Woods Conference. The Federal Reserve stood at the center of this new order. The U.S. dollar became the world's reserve currency, backed by gold. Other currencies pegged to it. But by 1971, America could no longer afford to keep gold backing its currency. President Nixon ended the gold standard, forever transforming the Fed's powers.
Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets.
With gold no longer tethering the dollar, the Fed was free to print money as needed. This gave it tremendous flexibility, but also new dangers. The 1970s saw runaway inflation. In response, Fed Chairman Paul Volcker raised interest rates to nearly 20%, triggering a painful recession. The message was clear: the Fed had the power to cause or cure economic misery. In 2008, the collapse of Lehman Brothers sent global markets into free fall. The Fed responded with unprecedented measures, slashing interest rates to zero, bailing out financial giants, and creating trillions in new money through quantitative easing. Critics accused it of rewarding recklessness. Supporters argued it saved the global economy. Either way, it was clear: the Fed could shape reality itself. As the dust settled after the 2008 crisis, the Federal Reserve came under sustained fire, not from street protests, but from economists, academics, and lawmakers, questioning its expanding power and perceived favoritism toward big banks. At the same time, trust in traditional institutions was eroding. Into that breach stepped something radically different: Bitcoin. Created in 2009, it offered a decentralized, deflationary alternative to central banking, outside the reach of any government or financial elite. And perhaps sensing this shift in public mood, the Fed began to change. Though it had always offered limited press access and delayed meeting minutes, It wasn't until 2011, under Chairman Bernanke, that it began holding regular press conferences and took serious steps toward transparency. When COVID-19 struck in 2020, the Fed once again unleashed vast amounts of liquidity. Trillions in stimulus were pumped into the economy. Interest rates dropped to near zero. Inflation initially stayed low, but by 2021 it surged to levels not seen in 40 years. The Fed was forced to reverse course, hiking rates to slow down the overheating economy. Critics asked, had the Fed created a monster it could no longer control? In 2023, the Fed launched FedNow, a real-time payment system, while exploring central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Proponents say this will modernize finance and improve efficiency. Detractors warn it could give the government unprecedented control over private transactions. In a world increasingly dominated by data, algorithms, and geopolitics, the Federal Reserve's next chapter could blur the line between monetary policy and social engineering. Today, the Federal Reserve stands at a crossroads. Its dual mandate to control inflation and ensure employment has never been harder to balance. It is blamed for housing bubbles, student debt, and wage stagnation. Yet without it, the modern economy might collapse. Is it an independent guardian of stability or an unaccountable engine of inequality? What comes next? Will the Federal Reserve evolve into a fully digitized, AI-driven system, managing not just dollars, but carbon credits and social impact scores? Or will it be dismantled by populist revolt, replaced by decentralized financial systems? The only certainty is this: the Fed will remain at the center of every major economic decision in the foreseeable future. Whether that brings prosperity or peril depends on who controls the levers and whether the public ever gets a say. The Federal Reserve began in secrecy, rose in crisis, and now wields powers once reserved for monarchs and emperors. It has fought inflation, rescued banks, and tried to steady the economy. But with great power comes great responsibility and great risk. As we face a future of digital currencies, geopolitical upheaval, and rising inequality, one question remains: can any one institution, however powerful, truly steer the fate of the world? Thanks for walking with us through the shadows and power plays that shape the Federal Reserve. If you enjoyed this journey into the unseen forces that control our economy, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, this is Footprints of History, where the past is never really past.